Years ago, I was in charge of a tiny restaurant somewhere in rural Tuscany. One night, a couple from the US sat down and immediately ordered the house specialty, the famous Florentine steak. Around here, that steak is basically kissed by fire and brought to the table. I made sure to explain that clearly. They said they understood. They did not. When the plate landed on their table, textbook perfect, the guy waved me over like something was wrong. He didn't even try to hide his annoyance. "This isn't cooked," he said. Then he asked me to take it back, burn it through, and bring him A1 sauce on the side. I told him, as politely as I could, that we don't serve that sauce and that our chef would never massacre a good cut of meat. That didn't go over well. They stormed out and later rewarded us with a one-star review, warning others about our dangerous food. Fast forward to my hometown, Toronto. I'm giving directions to another American tourist. I tell him the museum is about 3 kilometers straight ahead. He stops me immediately. "Kilometers?" he says, genuinely lost. "Can you convert that into something normal?" So I do the math in my head, say it's just under 2 miles. He nods with relief, like clarity has finally been restored. Moments like that remind me how often everything needs to be translated. Not just numbers, but reality itself. I saw the most extreme version of this while working at the Anne Frank House in Amsterdam. The tour had just ended. The room was quiet, heavy, and then a young American guy asked the guide, completely straight-faced, why the family didn't just order delivery if hiding was so uncomfortable. You could feel the air drop out of the room. The guide didn't raise her voice. She calmly explained that ordering food would have alerted the people hunting them down. The guy shrugged, unmoved, like the explanation was optional. I've watched the same mindset surface in ordinary places too. Like a German grocery store, where an American family stood frozen at checkout while the cashier scanned items at lightning speed. Groceries piled up, no bags in sight. The line backed up. When the cashier gestured for them to hurry, the wife snapped, accusing him of bad service, offended not by rudeness but by efficiency. A friend of mine works as a guide in Rome. One day he's standing with a group in front of the Pantheon when an American tourist looks up at the dome and says, "Yeah, it's nice, but have you seen the one at Epcot and Disney World? That one's way cooler. You can actually ride something inside it." My friend had to pause, collect himself, and explain that this dome wasn't designed for entertainment. It was an engineering breakthrough that's been standing for almost 2,000 years, not a themed attraction from the Reagan era. The guy wasn't impressed. I saw something similar in Japan. At a traditional onsen, the rules are very clear. You wash first, then you enter the bath. No exceptions. An American man walked right past the washing stations, climbed into the crystal-clear hot spring, and jumped in with a full cannonball. Every elderly Japanese man in the bath froze. Then, without a word, they all got out at once. The guy smiled proudly, like he'd just improved the vibe of the place instead of killing it. I was once guiding tours at a wildlife sanctuary in Australia. One American on my group wouldn't stop complaining about the heat, the flies, everything. Then he asked me, completely serious, which enclosure had the koalas that didn't have chlamydia. He said he only wanted photos with the clean ones. I had to explain that wildlife diseases don't work like restaurant hygiene ratings. He listened, shook his head, and said it sounded like poor wildlife management. Another time, I was in a small pub in rural Ireland during a traditional music session. The room was quiet, emotional, fiddle, guitar, the whole thing. Right in the middle of a slow, haunting solo, an American tourist yelled out, "Play Freebird." The music stopped. The pub turned. The musician looked at him and calmly said, "Wrong country, mate," before starting a completely different song. The tourist spent the rest of the night complaining that the band had no sense of humor. I was once on a train from Paris to Nice when an American woman was loudly venting on her phone. She complained that the food was too rich, that she couldn't find ranch dressing anywhere, and that everything felt small. The hotel room, the cars, even the Coke bottles. "It's like they do it on purpose," she said, adding that she couldn't wait to get back to Texas, where things were the right size. She said all this while staring out at the French countryside like it was mildly inconvenient wallpaper. And at a winery in Bordeaux, during a tasting of an extremely expensive aged Grand Cru, the sommelier carefully explained the terroir, the history, the flavor notes. An American woman took one sip, frowned, pulled a packet of sugar from her purse, and stirred it into the glass. "It's a bit bitter," she said. The sommelier looked like he'd just watched a crime happen in slow motion. He stood there in silence for a solid minute, then quietly turned and walked away without saying a word. Not long after that, I overheard a conversation at a cafe in Madrid. An American guy was ranting to his friend about Spain. He couldn't wrap his head around siesta. "We tried to go shopping at 3 in the afternoon," he said, "and everything was closed. All of it. How does a country even make money if everyone shuts down to nap?" He called it lazy, and proudly added that back home, businesses would stay open nonstop to maximize profit. The idea that life might exist outside constant work clearly hadn't crossed his mind. On a flight to Bangkok, the American sitting next to me was flipping through a travel book. He turned to me and asked, completely seriously, if there were elephants walking around the city. He said he was hoping to ride one from his hotel to the palace. I had to explain that Bangkok is a massive modern city with millions of people, not a postcard jungle fantasy, and that elephant taxis are not a thing. He looked genuinely crushed, like the country had personally let him down. In a hostel in Prague, a young American backpacker was bragging to anyone who would listen about how he negotiated cheaper beer. He explained that the price was 50 koruna, but he handed the bartender $2 instead. He didn't even argue, the guy said proudly. What he didn't understand was that he had massively underpaid, and that the bartender was probably too stunned by the audacity to respond. At the Tower of London, I once heard a tourist ask a beefeater if the crown jewels on display were fake. He assumed the real ones were stored somewhere safer, possibly in America. The guide, a man carved entirely out of British restraint, stared at him and calmly replied that the United Kingdom was more than capable of protecting its own treasures, and that the jewels were very real. The tourist still didn't look convinced. I also worked at a hotel in Iceland one winter. At 2 in the morning, a guest from California called the front desk, furious that his room was freezing and accusing us of broken heating. When I went up, I saw the thermostat cranked to the maximum and the window wide open. He wanted fresh mountain air. I had to explain that no heater on Earth can fight Arctic wind pouring straight into the room. In a packed market in Marrakesh, I watched an American woman aim her phone at a man with a trained monkey. The man gestured calmly, making it clear that photos weren't free. This was how he made a living. She took offense immediately. She said she wasn't paying because the photo was for Instagram, and that the exposure alone was payment enough. According to her, he should be grateful she was about to make his monkey famous. When she tried to snap the picture anyway, she looked genuinely shocked as the man covered the monkey's face and walked off without another word. I saw a different kind of impatience in southern Italy, where restaurant service moves at its own pace. An American family grew more irritated by the minute. After nearly 2 hours, the father waved down the waiter and explained that back home, they would have finished the entire meal in under an hour. He asked for the check so they could leave. The waiter smiled, completely unbothered, and told him there was no reason to rush. He was on vacation with his family, and the evening was meant to be enjoyed. The idea landed like a foreign language. At the Vienna State Opera, a couple seated in front of me talked through most of the first act. During intermission, an Austrian woman politely asked them to lower their voices. The American husband snapped back that they had paid for their tickets and could talk if they wanted. He called it freedom of speech, as if that concept overruled every rule of etiquette ever written inside an opera house. On a guided tour through the Scottish Highlands, a tourist asked the guide why the country still bothered with kings and queens. He referenced 1776 and suggested Scotland try a revolution and get a president instead, apparently a more efficient system. The guide, whose family had lived there for centuries, blinked once and said they'd take the suggestion under consideration. And in a small Paris bakery, I watched an American point aggressively at a display case and announce, slowly and loudly, that he wanted a big chocolate donut. The baker, who spoke flawless English, calmly explained that it was a croissant, and that they didn't sell donuts. The customer didn't find that amusing. He got angry, as if the bakery had personally failed him. "What kind of bakery doesn't sell donuts?" the American snapped before storming out, acting like the place had personally wronged him by daring to be French. On a cultural tour in Kenya, I watched an American tourist ask a Maasai village elder, through a translator, why their homes were made from mud and dung. He suggested they switch to normal houses, preferably with brick walls and air conditioning. The elder listened, then calmly replied that they saw no reason to build homes that cut them off from the land that sustains them. The tourist shook his head, muttering about how backward it all seemed. I once spoke with an American student studying abroad in Spain who told me his host family was strange. When I asked why, he explained that they all sat down together for dinner every night around 10 and talked for hours. He couldn't understand why they didn't just eat separately and watch TV in their rooms. He wanted to grab his plate and disappear to Netflix. He had no idea that those long dinners were the center of their family life. At Tokyo's famous fish market, I saw a chef slicing an immaculate piece of high-grade tuna for sashimi. An American tourist leaned in and asked if the chef could cook it instead. Maybe fry it with butter. The chef looked at the fish, then at the tourist, gave a single sharp shake of his head, and turned away. Conversation over. During a pub quiz in a small English village, the host asked for the capital of Australia. An American on the visiting team confidently shouted, "Sydney." When the answer was revealed as Canberra, he argued loudly, insisting that Sydney had the Opera House and therefore had to be the capital. He was fully convinced the quiz, the pub, and possibly the entire country of Australia were wrong. I also worked at a high-end restaurant in Tokyo, where service is treated almost like a ceremony. An American couple finished their multi-course meal and left a generous cash tip on the table. The waiter rushed after them, visibly distressed, to return the money, explaining that tipping wasn't expected and could even be taken as disrespect. The couple looked confused, like kindness itself had just been rejected. The American guy still wouldn't let it go. He tried to push the cash back into the waiter's hand, smiling like he was doing him a favor. "Come on, you earned it," he kept saying. Eventually, the manager had to step in and gently explain that in Japan, good service isn't something extra, it's the baseline. And insisting on a tip was actually making the staff uncomfortable. The couple left annoyed, muttering that some people apparently don't know how to accept a compliment. Later, in Milan around 4 in the afternoon, I watched an American woman confidently order a cappuccino. The barista politely suggested an espresso instead, or maybe a macchiato. She ignored him and doubled down. Large cappuccino, extra foam. He made it with the expression of someone betraying centuries of tradition. Then she asked for it to go. The cafe went quiet. Italians froze mid-sip. Afternoon milk coffee was bad enough. Taking it out the door was cultural chaos. She couldn't figure out why everyone was staring. At the East Side Gallery in Berlin, an American couple stood in front of the murals on the remains of the wall. The guy said loudly that it was a shame the wall had been ruined with graffiti and that someone should clean it up. A German man nearby calmly explained that the graffiti was the monument, the art, the history, the voice of freedom. The couple nodded awkwardly and went back to taking selfies, the message completely lost. I once stood in a perfectly organized bus queue in London. A group of Americans arrived, walked straight past everyone, and took positions at the front. When the bus pulled in, they moved to board first. A very polite British man tapped one of them on the shoulder and apologized before pointing out the line. The American glanced back and said, "We're all going to the same place, right?" The synchronized sigh from the queue was almost poetic. In Pompeii, a guide was explaining how volcanic ash preserved the ancient city. An American tourist raised his hand and asked why everything still looked broken if it was preserved so well. He suggested rebuilding it to make it more impressive for visitors. The guide just stood there, silent, trying to process the idea. At the Uffizi Gallery in Florence, an American family walked in with 2 kids running, shouting, and grabbing at the ropes. A guard politely asked the parents to calm them down. The father said kids can't be expected to be quiet and suggested the museum should create a children's play area if they didn't like it. The guard walked away, defeated. And finally, my cousin once hosted an American exchange student in Germany. Breakfast was laid out: bread rolls, cheese, cold cuts, jam. The student stared at the table in horror and asked where the real breakfast was. No Pop-Tarts, no sugary cereal. He genuinely couldn't understand that his version of breakfast wasn't the global default.